I'm looping everyone in, my brother Derek said, his fingers dancing across his laptop keyboard. The screen chimed, calendar invites shooting out to the entire leadership team. I watched the notifications pop up on other people's phones around the conference table. Mine stayed dark and silent. Derek's jaw set in that satisfied way it always did when he felt in control. Someone coughed nervously. My Uncle Howard folded his hands on the mahogany table, studying his knuckles like they held secrets. No one looked at me, even though I was standing right there holding the financial projections they'd spent the last hour praising. The silence pressed against my chest until I felt my lungs tighten. I forced a smile because that's what I always did. I made it easy for them to pretend everything was fine, that excluding me from the planning session for our family's manufacturing company was just an oversight. When the meeting ended, they gathered their leather portfolios and expensive pens around me like I was furniture. I stood frozen, waiting for the heavy door to close before I let my professional mask crack. That's when the truth settled into my bones like winter cold. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice they'd made together and I hadn't even seen it coming. My name is Nina Winters and this is the story of how I disappeared. At dinner that night, Mom asked if I'd tried her pot roast. Her voice had that bright, artificial quality she used when pretending everything was perfect. Derek talked over my attempted answer, using phrases I recognized from my own presentations. Operational efficiency. Market positioning. Strategic alignment. Words I'd taught him. I cut my meat into tiny pieces, mechanical and precise. I chewed slowly, listening to Uncle Howard say, "We'll handle the supplier access internally from now on." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples no one else seemed to notice. I nodded because that's what they expected. The dining room felt tilted like the floor might give way if I shifted my weight too quickly. When I excused myself, claiming exhaustion from the long day, no one protested. No one followed me down the hallway. In the bathroom, I gripped the marble countertop and stared at my reflection. My face looked the same as always. Oval-shaped hazel eyes, brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. But something behind my eyes had changed. I practiced not crying, taking deep breaths until my throat unclenched. I washed my hands twice, watching the soap suds circle the drain. On the drive home to my apartment, I kept the radio off. I needed to hear the quiet, to let the reality sink in without distractions. The next morning, my security badge wouldn't open the executive side entrance. I swiped it once, watching the light flash red. Tried again slower, pressing the card flat against the reader. Still red. A security guard I'd known for 3 years glanced over, looking genuinely apologetic. "System update, Ms. Winters," he offered, his voice uncomfortable. "Try the main entrance." I thanked him like the malfunction was somehow my fault, like I'd inconvenienced everyone by expecting my access to work. Inside, I rode the elevator to the 3rd floor and settled at my desk. My email inbox showed a message about distribution list changes. My name had been moved from leadership team to operations support. Support. The word felt deliberately chosen, a gentle demotion disguised as reorganization. I sat down and opened the quarterly budget file anyway, the spreadsheet I'd maintained for 5 years. The numbers still made sense to me. They still told their truth in columns and formulas. That was something solid when everything else felt like shifting sand. When Derek passed my desk mid-morning, he patted the partition like you'd pat a loyal dog. "All good, Nina?" he asked, not pausing for an answer, already moving toward his corner office. I watched his back retreat and felt something settle in my chest. They weren't pushing me out. They were assuming I'd stay in this smaller box they'd built around me. A vendor called before lunch, her voice tight with frustration. "We need approval to proceed with the order," she said. "The portal's blocking us and your brother isn't responding." I pulled up the supplier permissions system, a platform I'd built 3 years ago during a compliance overhaul nobody else wanted to handle. My name sat alone at the administrator level, inherited from years of unglamorous cleanup work. I could have fixed her problem in 30 seconds. Instead, I asked her to submit the request in writing through the proper channels. When I hung up, my hands were completely steady. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it Documentation. The name was boring, forgettable. Perfect. I wrote a detailed note about the call. Date, time, vendor name, request details, reason for denial. I saved it and closed the folder. The day moved around me in its usual rhythms. I moved very little, watching and listening. By 5 o'clock I understood something important. They'd built a trap around themselves, thinking it would contain me. But they'd forgotten who installed the locks. They'd forgotten Nina Winters knew where all the hinges were hidden, which systems depended on access only I controlled. Their mistake was thinking invisible meant powerless. At Thursday's weekly stand-up meeting, Uncle Howard thanked the team for strong momentum. Derek outlined an aggressive timeline for expanding into the Midwest market, his confidence filling the room like expensive cologne. The timeline skipped a critical dependency, warehouse certification that took months, not weeks. I waited for someone to mention it. Our operations manager stayed quiet. Our CFO nodded along, taking notes. No one asked the obvious questions about logistics, about regulatory compliance, about the infrastructure gaps. I raised my hand halfway, then lowered it slowly. The conference room smelled like dry erase markers and burned coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed. When the meeting ended, everyone filed out energized, already planning celebration drinks. I stayed behind and erased the whiteboard myself, watching Derek's confident timeline disappear under broad strokes. The clean white surface felt like a blank page, like possibility. As I capped the marker, I made a decision that felt both simple and dangerous. I would stop saving them from themselves. I would stop being the net that caught their mistakes before they hit the ground. I would let gravity work. I started carrying a small notebook I never shared with anyone. In meetings I asked fewer questions, offered less pushback. I listened for patterns in how they talked, the way Uncle Howard avoided specifics about costs, the way Derek rushed past anything that might slow his vision. Without my gentle corrections they grew bolder. Emails started arriving with assumptions baked into every line, decisions made without consulting the data. I replied with careful neutrality. Received. Noted. Will review. Each response was a brick in a foundation only I could see taking shape. When a junior analyst named Paolo asked for my guidance on a supplier contract, I redirected him to the process documentation I'd written and maintained. He thanked me enthusiastically. I smiled and told him the system was designed to be self-service. It was true, I'd built it that way deliberately, knowing knowledge was power but process was control. At home that evening I made a simple dinner and thought about architecture. How you could build something that looked open and accessible but had invisible gates at every critical juncture. How you could be helpful and essential while keeping the master keys in your pocket. Nobody suspects the quiet one of playing chess. Legal sent an urgent update request Monday morning with a 48-hour deadline. A regulatory filing that required detailed financial disclosures. I forwarded it to Derek with a polite note acknowledging receipt. He replied within minutes. Handled. Thanks. Except it wasn't handled. The compliance clause they'd overlooked sat buried in a renewal agreement I'd negotiated 2 years ago with our largest distributor. I printed the relevant pages and slid them into my filing cabinet, organized by date and category. At lunch, Mom texted a heart emoji and asked if I wanted to join her for yoga. I read the message 3 times and didn't respond. The silence felt like reclaiming space. In the afternoon, the vendor from last week called again. We're completely blocked now, she said, frustration bleeding into desperation. The shipment's ready, but we can't process without system access. I asked her to hold, letting the silence stretch for 15 seconds. When I unmuted, I kept my voice professionally sympathetic. Please document the delay in writing and send it to the general compliance email. We'll need an official record for the review process. Her exhale told me she understood the subtext. This wasn't getting resolved quickly. After we hung up, I added another note to my documentation folder. The delays were piling up like snow before anyone noticed the storm coming. They announced a reorganization on a Tuesday afternoon, calling it operational streamlining. My role shrank on the organizational chart, my title modified with qualifiers. But my actual responsibilities expanded quietly. All the tedious compliance work, all the system administration, all the vendor relationships no one else wanted to maintain. Polite applause rippled through the conference room. I clapped last and quietest. Afterward, Derek leaned in close, his cologne too strong. It's temporary, Nina, he said, lowering his voice like we were conspirators. Just until we stabilize the expansion. You understand? I met his eyes and nodded slowly. The lie sat between us, warm and familiar. We both knew nothing about this was temporary. Back at my desk, I opened my resume for the first time in 6 years. I didn't update it to start job hunting. Not yet, but to remind myself who I was without them. Nina Winters. Systems architect, compliance specialist, the person who'd built the infrastructure they took for granted. The bullet points looked stronger than I felt. I closed the file and returned to work. Patience, I reminded myself, was a skill you could sharpen like a blade. You just had to be willing to wait for the right moment to use it. An unscheduled call came through from our primary lender Wednesday morning. "We need confirmation on loan covenants," the bank representative said, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first time he'd asked. Specifically, the debt-to-equity ratios from last quarter. I transferred him to Uncle Howard's extension and stayed on the line, my phone muted. The pause before Howard answered stretched uncomfortably long. "We'll follow up with documentation," Howard finally said, his voice thin and brittle. "End of week." After the call disconnected, I sent the bank a detailed summary of the covenant requirements, copying everyone on the leadership distribution list. No commentary, no interpretation. Just facts and deadlines, clinical and precise. Derek stopped by my desk an hour later, his brows knitted together. "Good catch on that bank thing," he said, trying to sound casual. "Didn't realize they were getting anxious." I shrugged like it was nothing, like I hadn't deliberately let the situation develop to this point. "Just staying on top of communications," I said. The hook was setting deeper every time they thanked me for problems I'd allowed to grow. Every time they relied on me to catch something at the last second, they proved they couldn't function without the systems I controlled. And they still didn't see it. At home that evening, I cooked pasta and let the water boil over. I stood there watching foam spill across the stovetop like a slow-motion failure, not moving to stop it. When the pot was half empty, I turned off the burner and cleaned up the mess. Then I started over, and the second pot behaved perfectly. I ate standing at my kitchen counter, scrolling through nothing on my phone, my mind elsewhere. Strategy was settling into me, becoming as natural as breathing. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger leaked out in visible ways, made you sloppy and obvious. This felt contained, controlled. Like water behind a dam waiting. Before bed, I created another folder in my documentation system and labeled it Critical Path Dependencies. Boring names were hard to question, easy to ignore. As I turned off the bedside lamp, I realized I hadn't thought about the meeting where they'd excluded me all day. The sting was fading, replaced by something colder and more useful. I slept without dreams, deeply and completely. My subconscious had nothing to process because my conscious mind had a plan. Procurement flagged a discrepancy Thursday morning. A supplier charging rates that didn't match our contract terms. I replied with the policy link. My name listed in the footer as the document author and administrator. The email thread grew longer as people weighed in with opinions. Derek jumped into the thread mid-morning, confident and directive. "Use the standard rate," he wrote. "Move forward." He'd missed a step, overlooked the amendment from last fiscal year that changed our pricing structure. I waited 3 hours before responding, timing my correction for maximum visibility. Per the FY23 amendment attached, the adjusted rate structure applies to all orders over $50,000. Current order qualifies. Recommend proceeding with supplier's invoice as submitted. The correction landed softly but stuck. Derek emailed me privately 10 minutes later. "Can you just handle the procurement stuff? Getting too detailed for my bandwidth." I replied immediately, "Of course. Happy to support." I always said yes to taking on more responsibility. The difference now was I documented every time they handed me another piece of infrastructure they didn't understand. When I closed my laptop that evening, I caught my reflection in the black screen. Nina Winters looked steadier than she had in months. Friday brought a small celebration. They'd closed a deal with a regional distributor. Someone brought cake from the expensive bakery downtown. Uncle Howard handed me a plate saying, "Couldn't have done it without you, Nina," while already turning to shake hands with Derek. I took a bite. The cake tasted like sugar and air, fancy and insubstantial. In the afternoon, legal sent another reminder about the regulatory filing. The deadline had passed at 5 p.m. the previous day. I forwarded it again without comment, just a simple FYI in the subject line. Derek called my desk at 6:15. I let it ring once, twice. Answered on the third ring, my voice cheerful and helpful. "Happy to pull together what they need," I said. Might take until Monday to compile everything properly. The word properly carried weight we both understood. Rushed work created liability. The right way took time. Do what you need to do, he said, defeated. After we hung up, I opened the filing cabinet and pulled the documents I'd already prepared days ago. They just didn't need to know that yet. Help sounded different now, less like generosity, more like leverage. The audit notice arrived Thursday morning, not catastrophic but serious. State regulators wanted to review our operational licenses and safety compliance records. Nothing criminal, just detailed and demanding precision we hadn't maintained consistently. I assembled the required documents methodically, every page organized and cross-referenced. Derek hovered near my desk, restless energy radiating off him. "We're fine, right?" he asked for the third time. "This is just routine." "Most likely," I said, not looking up from my computer screen. I kept clicking through folders, compiling information only I knew how to locate efficiently. The auditor arrived Tuesday and asked a technical question about our hazardous materials handling procedures. Everyone looked at me. I answered clearly, referencing the specific protocol number and implementation date. The room exhaled collectively, tension draining. Afterward, Uncle Howard clapped my shoulder with forced heartiness. "See? Nothing to worry about. You've got this under control." I smiled and nodded. Inside, I moved a mental file from boring details to critical infrastructure. Every time they leaned on my competence, they proved my point. They'd taken me for granted so long they couldn't imagine the scaffolding collapsing. But I could. I'd already imagined it in detail. HR scheduled a check-in meeting, part of the post-reorganization process. The representative, a cheerful woman named Brenda, asked how I felt about the recent changes. I chose my words carefully, like selecting tools from a workshop. "I'm aligned with the company's direction," I said. "My focus is on maintaining operational stability during the transition period." Brenda smiled, visibly relieved. She'd probably expected complaints, maybe tears. Instead, I gave her corporate language, smooth and meaningless. Paperwork was where truth went to hide, buried under professional jargon and careful phrasing. I signed what was fair and legal. I noted what wasn't, storing observations for later use. That evening at home, I poured a glass of wine and took one sip before setting it aside. My mind was too clear to blur with alcohol. I could feel the story tightening around them like a knot you pull from exactly the right end. They thought they'd won by reshaping my role. They didn't understand they'd just handed me proof of every assumption, every oversight, every piece of infrastructure they couldn't function without. The documentation folder was getting thick, organized, undeniable. They announced a partnership with a regional logistics company, positioning it as a major growth opportunity. All-hands meeting, catered lunch, Derek presenting my operational framework with his voice and his confidence. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. I clapped last, watching Derek accept congratulations. Afterward, he pulled me aside, his expression attempting sincerity. "We're good, right, Nina?" he asked. "I know things have been weird, but we're still family. Still a team." I looked at him, really looked at his face, trying to find the brother I'd grown up with underneath the executive persona he'd built. "Of course," I said. "We're fine." The false ending hovered there, tempting. I could feel the pull to let things stay comfortable, to accept this diminished role, to keep being useful and invisible. Instead, I went back to my desk and drafted an email, scheduling it to send Monday morning. Timing mattered. Scheduling could be a form of mercy, giving them one last peaceful weekend. The partnership would need system access I controlled. And unlike my family, outside companies followed their contracts precisely, demanded what they'd been promised. The collision was coming and I was the only one who saw it approaching. The logistics partner requested dashboard access Monday as specified in their agreement. IT looped me into the approval chain automatically. I granted read-only access, exactly as outlined in the contract Derek had signed. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Derek's text was terse. "They need edit access. Can you update?" I pulled up the partnership agreement, scanning the technical specifications section. Read-only access for the first 90 days, then reassess based on security protocols. I replied with a screenshot of the relevant clause. Contract specifies read-only initially. Silence. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, "Okay." At lunch, Mom texted another heart emoji. I muted the notification thread without opening it. By mid-afternoon, the partner's project manager escalated politely, emailing Uncle Howard and Derek. I waited until I was copied before responding. I forwarded the contract clause again, my tone professionally apologetic but firm. Happy to discuss modification process with legal present. Current access level reflects signed agreement terms. The smile on my face felt new, unfamiliar. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, more like recognition. I was watching them discover the walls I'd been building all along, and they still thought they were in charge. Friday afternoon drinks in the main conference room, a company tradition. Laughter bounced off the glass walls, ice clinking in expensive glassware. Uncle Howard toasted growth and family values. Derek toasted the partnership and future opportunities. I sipped club soda and watched them relax into certainty, into the comfortable assumption that momentum would continue. When someone asked about next quarter's projections, Derek waved it off confidently. Already locked in, he said. We're set. I raised my glass and met his eyes across the room. He smiled back, completely oblivious. He didn't see the door closing behind him, the walls tightening. He didn't see me at all, just the helpful sister-shaped fixture in the background. I left early, claiming weekend plans. Nobody asked what they were. At home, I changed into comfortable clothes and made a simple dinner. I ate slowly, tasting each bite, present in my body in a way I hadn't been for months. That night, I slept deeply and well. No anxiety, no second-guessing. Everything was in motion now, playing out according to rules they'd established. I was just following their own policies to the letter. Monday detonated quietly the way real disasters do. The logistics partner froze their integration rollout, citing unresolved access and control issues. Our bank sent a formal request for updated attestations on financial controls. Legal flagged potential regulatory exposure in our compliance documentation. Derek paced the hallway outside my desk, his confident facade cracking. Nina, we need full system access approved, he said, breathing quick and shallow. Today. This is holding up everything. I pulled up the access control list on my screen, turning the monitor slightly so he could see. My name sat alone at the administrator level across every critical system. Submit the formal request through IT, I said, my voice steady and helpful. I'll process it according to the standard approval workflow. The room stilled. Uncle Howard's jaw tightened visibly. For the first time in months, they looked at me like I was real, like I was a person who could make decisions that affected them. The shift in the air was palpable, electric. We don't have time for workflow, Derek said, his voice rising. This is family. Just do it. I met his eyes calmly. This is business. And business has processes. The requests flooded in Tuesday. Emails marked urgent, people stopping by my desk, Derek leaving voicemails with increasing desperation. I processed each request in order, following the approval protocols I'd documented years ago. Each approval required supporting documentation they didn't have. Security questionnaires. Risk assessments. Department head sign-offs. Forms they'd always skipped because I'd always just handled things informally. We can't wait for all this, Derek said, standing over my desk mid-morning. We'll lose the partnership. I kept my voice even, almost gentle. Then we can't proceed safely. These are our own compliance requirements. The partner's project manager joined an emergency video call that afternoon, asking for realistic timelines. I provided them accurate, conservative estimates based on proper process. 30 days for full system integration minimum. After the call ended, Uncle Howard shut himself in his office. Through the glass wall, I watched him sit heavily in his leather chair, his head in his hands. No one disturbed him. They were all starting to understand the shape of what they'd built, and where they'd forgotten to leave themselves exits. Wednesday they tried to route around me. Derek called IT directly, requesting administrator access. The IT director, a methodical man named Vincent, refused politely. Security protocols require approval from the current administrator, he explained. That's Ms. Winters. That's company policy. Compliance backed me when Uncle Howard tried to override the processes. The auditor from last month emailed a thank you note for our thorough documentation standards. My inbox hummed with mounting pressure, but I answered each message slowly, carefully, by the book. At noon, Mom called my cell phone. I watched it vibrate on my desk and didn't pick up. By 3 p.m., the board of directors requested an emergency briefing on operational delays. I prepared slides without adjectives or opinions, just facts and timelines. The video call was tense and quiet. When it ended, Derek stared at the blank screen like it had personally betrayed him. "This isn't sustainable," he said to no one in particular. I closed my laptop gently. "No," I agreed. "It's not." The admission hung there and I watched realization dawn slowly across his face. They'd built something that couldn't function without me, and they'd made sure I had every reason to stop helping them. They called an emergency vote Thursday, restructuring my role back to leadership level on paper. Uncle Howard framed it as correcting an administrative error, his voice stiff with forced casualness. The offer came with apologies, with promises, with the assumption I'd be grateful for the restoration. I read the proposal once carefully. Then I declined. "I'm transitioning to a new opportunity," I said. The lie felt clean leaving my mouth easier than I'd expected. Uncle Howard argued process, chain of command, family obligation. I cited my employment contract right back. The at-will clause, the notice requirements, the documentation of my reduced role. Everything was legal, everything was proper. The vote passed without me. I submitted my formal resignation that afternoon, effective in 30 days. Outside, the November sky was bright and cold, the air sharp in my lungs. I took a long breath, feeling lighter. I'd already lined up a consulting contract with their logistics partner. They'd need someone who understood the systems, and Nina Winters was suddenly very available. The irony was perfect. They scrambled through the following week. Key vendors paused orders pending clarification on approval processes. The logistics partner revised their timeline, citing operational uncertainty. None of it was illegal or even unusual. Just gravity, just consequences, just the natural result of building a house on foundations only one person understood. I transferred system ownership cleanly, documenting every step according to IT protocols. I trained Vincent on the basics, but we both knew it would take him months to understand the full architecture. No one person could replace the institutional knowledge I'd accumulated over years of unglamorous maintenance work. No fireworks, no dramatic confrontations. Just a quiet unwinding, professional and irreversible. When I disabled my system access on my last day, the computer asked for confirmation. I clicked yes without hesitation. The sound it made was small, almost apologetic. Final. My last day was a Friday. I cleaned out my desk methodically. Photos, plants, the good stapler I'd brought from home. Derek hovered nearby, his face pale and uncertain. "Nina, we didn't mean," he started. I smiled at him, gentle and genuine. "I know," I said, and it was true. They hadn't meant to exclude me maliciously. They just assumed I'd always be there, convenient and invisible, catching their mistakes without complaint. Intentions didn't move markets. Intentions didn't maintain systems or manage vendors. Intentions were just wishes, and wishes didn't build anything real. I walked out without giving a speech, without grand pronouncements. In the lobby, the security guard who'd apologized about my badge weeks ago nodded respectfully. "Good luck out there, Ms. Winters," he said. The door opened smoothly for me as I stepped outside. The afternoon sun was bright and warm despite the season. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. Then I walked to my car, got in, and drove toward whatever came next. Weeks later, I started at a mid-sized firm in a proper leadership role. My title fit my experience. My voice mattered in meetings. I contributed to strategy without having to force my way into conversations. I slept through the night, waking refreshed instead of anxious. News traveled eventually, the way it always does in business circles. The family company restructured again, bringing in outside management. The logistics partnership dissolved before implementation. The bank tightened oversight, requiring additional guarantees. I didn't look for details or updates. I'd closed that chapter completely, no loose threads trailing behind me. Piece I learned was selective attention, choosing what deserved your energy and what you could release. My new colleagues respected my expertise, asked for my input, included me in planning from the beginning. It shouldn't have felt revolutionary, but it did. Being valued felt like breathing clean air after years in a stuffy room. Sometimes I thought about sending Derek a message, something gracious about moving forward. But I never did. Some stories didn't need tidy endings or reconciliation scenes. Some stories just needed to be over. Sometimes late at night I think about that first meeting where the calendar invite never arrived. The folder of projections sliding past me on the polished table. The careful way no one met my eyes. The silence that pressed in until I smiled first, because I always smiled first. I think about standing there feeling useful and invisible, believing that if I just worked harder, proved myself more thoroughly, eventually they'd see me. Eventually they'd value what I contributed. I was wrong about that. They saw me perfectly clearly. They just saw someone they could take for granted, someone who'd stay no matter how small they made her world. What they didn't see was that quiet people notice everything. That invisible people can build walls right in front of you if you never bother to look. I built something they had to ask access to. Not out of revenge but out of self-preservation. Not to hurt them but to stop letting them hurt me. And then I learned the most important lesson of all. I learned how to live without asking permission. How to walk through doors I'd opened for myself. How to trust that my value wasn't determined by whether my family noticed it. I learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can build isn't an empire or a legacy. It's a boundary, clean and firm, that lets you finally breathe. My name is Nina Winters, and this is the story of how I became visible by learning when to disappear.